Hi and welcome. In this second part of the Phantom familiarization, we have a look at what makes the F-4E different from the previous Phantoms and its Navy brothers. Besides the differences in avionics and upgrades, the two main features that make the F-4E stand out are the M61A1 20mm Vulcan 6-barrel rotary cannon and the installation of leading-edge slats. Other improvements materialized along the F-4E but are less visible. For example, the older J79-GE-15 was replaced by the more powerful J79-GE-17, but they kind of represent an evolution rather than a design and perspective change. So let's start with the gun. Very long story, very short. With the advent of missiles, the big brains thought that the era of the gun was over, as threats were better dealt with by the explosive warhead of missiles. For this reason, the gun was deemed obsolete and was not installed in the Phantom. This comes across as a la Giulio Douhet approach. Douhet was an Italian general who studied and theorized the usage of air power after the First World War. His ideas were drastic and presented a neat cut with most of the other theories. However, the majority of his ideas were proven very wrong by the upcoming Second World War. In a somewhat similar fashion, the theory that called for the end of the aerial fights and the obsolescence of the gun was proven wrong on multiple levels. In premise, the issues with the missiles that should have brought forward the rocket revolution, especially the M4 Falcon and the early M7 Sparrow, accounts of Phantom crews capable of maneuvering in an advantageous position just to be let down by the missiles are not hard to find. The gun pod could be installed under the belly of the Phantom, but this means adding drag. The SW-23 was used by the F-4E and the British Phantoms, who commonly carried it in Germany and the Falklands. The second level is technological, but it is also something that can affect present-day engagements as well. The ability to discern friend from foes. Although the M7 is potentially a BVR-capable missile, tight ROE and VID required, made it de facto a within visual range weapon. Combat area AFF mentioned in the previous video, and the AN/ASX-1T0 acronym for Television Infrared Detection and Ranging tried to bypass the problem, but at least in the Vietnam War, most of the greatest successes came using ad hoc traps and tactics to lure the MiGs in. Small parenthesis about the T0, this camera was created by Northrop and introduced in 1972. It resembles the TCS of the Tomcat and can be similarly slaved to the radar. Thanks to this device, the crew could pick a target the scale of a Tupolev 95 Bear at 14 nautical miles, or the size of a MiG-23 Flogger at 10 nautical miles. Interestingly enough, eventually T0 became the common companion for strike Phantoms, rather than air defense, which used it to check on navigational waypoints. Back to the main discussion, the third level is historical, as the Cold War never developed into a full-scale war, and the hordes of Soviet bombers never came to be the threat they could have been. Most of the conflicts of the period remain on a more limited scale, with several encounters between fighters rather than strategic bombers. In the Phantom E, the gun came at a price. With the demise of the planned CORDS, or Coherent On-Receive Doppler System, an advanced system that never materialized, and with the adoption of the long slim nose necessary to fit the gun, the F-4E could not mount the new OG-10 radar the Navy was using. Eventually, Westinghouse proposed the AN/APQ-120 radar, which resulted in a compromise between radar capabilities and the gun. Another less expected benefit is the addition of another fuel tank, used as a counterweight for the gun itself. The sketches you are watching show the position of the M61A1 and the AN/APQ-120. As you can see, the room is very limited. So, was the gun worth it? In air-to-ground missions, a gun can be used for strafing and suppressing a target. I suppose an internal gun is better in this regard, as it does not take an external hardpoint, and I haven't found enough accounts to comment on the usage of the gun during stealth missions. Anyway, it is in the air-to-air scenario that things became interesting, and the answer is, it's complicated. The Navy went fine without it, and had greater success in terms of kill-to-death ratio after Operation Linebackers 1 and 2, an impressive 6-1 for the Navy, against a meager 2-1 for the Air Force. But these numbers do not tell the whole story, of, for example, how poor the Air Force approach to training and rotations was, and certainly they don't tell much about the usage of the gun. Changing approach if we consider only the Air Force gun kills, the F-105 Thunder Chief scored the highest number, Next, the F-4D downed 6 aircraft using the SW-23 gun pod, and the F-4E downed 5 aircraft using the internal gun. And these numbers unfortunately provide only a fragment of the full picture, but I suppose that the fact that internal guns are diffused and used in modern jets endorses the direction the F-4E took. The second major difference between the F-4E and the Navy Phantoms of similar era is the wing. The boundary layer control based Navy wings were apt carrier operation designs. Quoting Anthony Thornborough and his book Use of Phantoms, they comprise of leading and trailing edge high lift flaps, with air piped for the 17th stage of the engine compressor and blown out over the flaps to increase the lift properties of the wings. So flaps come down, and the additional lift helps during landing and departure operations from the shore deck of a carrier. As the speed increases, the flaps come up and form a clean, low-drag wing, optimal for high-speed intercepts. However, this approach did not work very well with the Air Force, as piloting an heavy Phantom rigged with bombs at mid to low altitude whilst avoiding AAAs and SAMs could cause buffeting and potentially unrecoverable flat spins. The solution arrived in the form of the Agile Eagle program, where a new wing, featuring leading-edge slats, incredibly improved the stability and maneuverability at slow speeds. The slats were hydraulically operated and were extended at high angles of attack, thus preventing the airflow separation near the leading edge, resulting in more lift and stability. The cost is a slightly reduced top speed. The slats in fact retract above 600 knots or 10.5 units of AOA or less, thus improving the wing profile, so to speak. The results are however less efficient than the previous boundary layer control solution, but the slight increase in drag is a cost worth paying. And in a sense, the two aspects discussed today almost go hand in hand, as the slats provide more stability at high angles of attack, a situation that often happens in dogfights, where the gun has more chances to be used. And fun fact, the Navy eventually decided to upgrade their Phantoms as well, completing the refurbishment in the mid to late 70s and with the F-4S. This version added smokeless engines, strengthening the airframe and adding leading edge slats. Apparently the S in F-4S stands for slats. What about DCS? I don't think there is much to say here. In a game, having a gun is a no-brainer, as engagements protract themselves to the last liter of fuel and the last bullet. The leading edge slats will also help the Phantom during those fights, and in general they should make the Phantom more forgiving, as witnessed by several pilots of older Phantoms and then Phantom E. I hope you have found this video interesting and useful to better understand the peculiarities of the first Phantom to see the light of day in DCS. Thanks for watching and take care.